Hello, and welcome to my cake kitchen. My name is Gladys, and over here I make simple, informative tutorials to help you navigate cake decorating easily. Today, on this live, we are putting together a cake, a layered single tiered, double tiered cake. But I'll be talking you through all you need to know about the basics of layering a cake and how to fill a cake. Essentially, we're filling and stacking the layers of cake here. I was here earlier about 10 or 15 minutes ago where I talked you through how to level a cake two ways using a knife and a leveler. So if you're a complete beginner and do not understand the basics of cake decorating and want to pick yourself some tips, you want to check that video up. But this is a follow on from that video where we are back to fill and stack the cake. We have some chocolate cake layers here. They are very delicate after layering them and it's falling apart. It's a very delicate, dense chocolate cake here. So it's hard to kind of handle and move them around without spreading crumbs everywhere. But otherwise, the goal here is to talk you through the filling and stacking process of this two-tiered chocolate cake, which is going to be filled with some chocolate buttercream. Now, this is not a process that is new on this channel. And if you've been here before, this is a process that I have undertaken time and again. In fact, the filling and stacking of cakes forms part of the basic foundation of the cake decorating process. That is, besides the cake that is being baked, which is left to set, you want to come back and level towards the cake. Get the cake layers level. Essentially, consider your cake layers as bricks. And for the purposes of understanding, cake layers are put together to form a tier. So if we're talking cake layers, we're talking about, for instance, synonymous with bricks. The bricks are put together to form their structure, and the structure in this case is what you call a tier. So if you're new to cake decorating and it's kind of difficult for you to understand the language of cake making, I'm going to try and slow things right down, keep it rather simple, and try and find some relatable comparisons to kind of make the understanding of the cake decorating process and, of course, the language rather easy and understandable for you. But like I said, I am Gladys. I'm a baker, cake decorator, and I've been doing this for nearly 10 years. Actually, I enjoy cake artistry, which is rather technical. If you've checked on the channel, you'll find 3D cakes to minion cakes, live, like very technical cakes. But my goal for this channel is also, besides enhancing my own skill, to bring you simple, informative tutorials to help you navigate cake decorating, as well as bringing you these live tutorials, which in a way I hope will form as some sort of learning resource for you so that you can take this information, make use of it, and help yourself if you are undertaking your own baking decorating processes at home in your own time. So if it's your first time you're on this channel, hello here and welcome. I hope you do consider subscribing. You stick around on the channel. You'll be spoiled for choice because we have so much fun here. We support each other a lot and we bake and we decorate. It's not all fun and games. A lot of the time it is very task centered. It is very informative. We undertake processes that actually aims to answer specific questions, talking buttercream, cake recipes, decorating processes, and the basics of all things cake. So, with all that out of the way, if you haven't subscribed, here is a little nudge to consider subscribing. Join the community here and hit the notification button so that if these videos are uploaded, especially the live, they are very consistent. I think we have up to about at least twice a week we're on a live, and the aim is to kind of increase that from 2 to 4 and hopefully as consistent as we can get them. So do leave your notification button on so that you can find notification for these videos from where you can learn a bit more. And if you're not a baker and you know somebody who enjoys baking and decorating and is unable to afford, say, some learning resources or take a class or any of that sort, these are actually class-worthy materials that would help inform and educate you about all things cake. With that said, let's go back to the task at hand. To fill and put a cake together is almost the building stages of your cake. So with that, you will need obviously a cake, which is the main subject to be put together. But before you get to putting the cake together, you need a few tools and equipments to help you with the process, which makes it a lot more easy and effective. So to start with, for me, I like to work on a cake surface. In the past, if you've been on the channel, I have used cake boards, cake drums, but over here today, I just have an acrylic disc. But because an acrylic disc can be a little bit flimsy to handle, underneath the acrylic disc is a cake board. So you can use a cake drum, a cake board by itself as a work surface. And this entire board is sitting on what you call a non-slip mat. A non-slip mat in name is to stop the cake from shifting and sliding. And over the non-slip mat is layered a turntable. The turntable come in all sorts, but they aim to do one thing, which is that they come with a turning mechanism that helps with turning the cake when you're working on it. You'll see how useful that is. But I would be hard pressed if I don't tell you that if you're a beginner and you don't have all these tools and equipment, perhaps it won't stop you. But if you have any investment to make, you don't necessarily need a fancy turntable. I'll say I probably have a fancy turntable that's in the other room, and that is because after so many years of baking and decorating, I just fancied an upgrade. But this was a £10 because I'm in the UK, a £10 turntable that I picked up from my local superstore, Sainsbury's, and that served me for the best part of 6 years, even before I invested in a more advanced turntable. That said, I'm still using it here. And if you've seen some of my live videos, in recent times I made a 4-tier cake, and this was the turntable that saw me put that cake together. I say that to say, when you can afford it, it's worth investing in premium equipment and tools to support your decorating process, but don't let the need for premium and expensive tools inhibit you from starting your journey. That said, a turntable comes super useful, and if you have to buy any tool, perhaps you should consider a turntable. With those basics ones done, we have a cake card. I've spoken a lot about cake cards over here on the channel. You'll find useful information all around. But the essence of a cake card for me is to serve as a base on which the cake sits on the surface. It helps to keep the cake sealed in so there is no exposure. It supports handling of the cake without like poking it into the cake, and just helps all things efficiency during the cake decorating process. So for the 2-tier cake, I have a 7-inch cake card and I have a 5-inch cake card. And these are the basics. I think the other tools I will need also is some spatula. The reason why I have it here is that I have a jar of hot water because I am going to be using ganache. I have a jar of hot water, that's just a coffee jar that has hot water in it, into which I have dipped my spatula. The offset spatula, as you can see, come in a set, and they are of different blades and lengths, and each one helps me to dispense my task a lot more efficiently and easily. I've spoken a lot about an offset spatula. For this process, I am also going to be employing the use of a piping bag with a round nozzle. Now, as somebody who has done baking and decorating for the last nearly 10 years, I am able to fill and stack a cake without the use of much of these tools. But as a beginner, it might just serve you to have the understanding of how these tools will support the process and make it more efficient and effective for you to get great results, which is why I have introduced them. If you've seen some of my videos, you'll find that I freehand a lot of them. The freehand is great for you to have to refine your skills for the decorating process, because that will serve you for a long time. But sometimes to get better results, you have to start from somewhere and build your confidence over time. So I'm going to be using a piping bag, and I'll be talking you through the advantages of having a piping bag and why it is necessary, especially if you're a beginner who is undertaking this process. Besides, obviously, the main subject, which is the cake that has been torted and leveled on top to get a flat surface cake, we have some buttercream here. This is my chocolate Russian buttercream that I have created on this channel. I think there is a live session where I have made it. It's on the channel. I'll be linking that in the description box for you, so you want to check all of that out. With that said, I am just going to go ahead and we're going to start the filling and stacking process. First of all, you can see me just wiping bits off here. It's because we have the cake crumb. But to start with, I am just going to, first of all, attach the cake card to my board surface. And the simple reason I do that, I'm using milk chocolate here. Milk chocolate ganache, sorry. And if you wonder why I am employing ganache in the process, it's because the cake is going to be covered in dark chocolate ganache. So I am going to be using ganache to hold it. I find that if you're using buttercream might be your go-to for this, but I have found buttercream to slip and slide, so I tend to not use buttercream at all and just go for ganache, which is a lot more steadier and does hold the card in place, because the intention for keeping the card in place is to make sure that it sets on the board surface so that when you stack the cake, it remains steady in place. So the chocolate ganache that has gone underneath serves as some sort of glue. Oh, sorry. There's Elsie in the chat. Elsie, hello there and welcome to the chat. It's a pleasure to have you. Elsie was just trying to say hello to me. So Elsie, great to have you on the chat. So we're talking about the cake card. It's been held in place with the glass serving as glue. So with that said, the next thing to do is to ensure that your next layer of cake goes over. Now, my ganache is a little bit set, so I know it is super sturdy. But if your ganache wasn't set or you're using buttercream for this process, what I will encourage is that after setting the card on the board, you leave the board and the card to set completely in the fridge before you come to put in the first layer of cake. But over here, my ganache is already set, so it kind of works for me, which is why I am going for it. Now, let's talk about the cake layers themselves. I'm going to run through some quick information for you here. Actually, I'm going to set it on it so that the ganache doesn't set hard. But as you can see, we have the cake broken on that side. So what I am going to do is set that in there. And as you can see the decorating process, you will see how I will fix this broken parts here. With that in mind, what you want to do about cake layers is that when you're layering cake, you want to consider your cake layers closely. Now, I baked 2 cakes, I leveled them, right? Sometimes if you don't have to level your cake, it's an advantage, because I bake my cakes deep. So these were 3 inches and I decided to level them. I wanted to have thinner cake layers to work with, but 1.5 inches is not exactly very thin, right? It is still thick. You're looking at 1.5 inches here. So that's not exactly thin because it could be smaller, but we also don't want the cake layers to be overwhelmed with too much buttercream. If you've been on the channel before, one thing I advocate is that there is no one cut rule for all cakes or for all decorating process. You obviously have to treat each cake as its own thing and consider the preferences that influences your choices and decision you make. So you have to treat the cake as in tandem with the person who the cake is going to be served. You want to ask yourself, What are the needs of this particular individual? What are they like? Do they like too much buttercream? Would they prefer more cake? Do they have a sweet tooth? All of this goes into consideration when you are layering a cake. But I guess that adds a lot more nuance to the decorating process or filling and stacking a cake, especially if you are a custom cake maker. If I was a bakery style cake business or bakery owner, I probably wouldn't make this specific considerations for my cake. The simple reason being that there's a larger audience to consider. I want to make sure my workflow and tasks are efficient from start to finish, and there is no specifications for particular cakes. The good thing is that I'm a custom cake service. I get to choose my customers as of when, who comes, and who I choose to serve. And I guess my customers sought me after because they require a certain cake where they drive my decisions and I bring my expertise to the table to support them. As a result, when I am filling a cake, the considerations for the specific individual needs play a key role. But if you're a beginner and that is not a need for you, I completely understand, and I'm going to try and keep the information very generalized for your convenience. With that said, the only reason I went for thicker layers here is that this cake is very delicate. So if I slice these cake layers into thinner layers, it is likely to crumble during the handling process. So I made a consideration to have 4 layers, but 1.5 inch thick so that it's still fairly balanced, that I can handle. It can hold the buttercream without crumbling and the buttercream doesn't overwhelm the cake. And that is the intention. Now, if you were baking shallow, which is if you already had the 2-inch tin pans and you baked your cakes and you didn't feel like you wanted to level them, fantastic and completely great for you. Supposing they don't dome or you flip them upside down and they are flat, you don't have this trouble I have here, which is that your cake won't be falling apart from the leveling and the torting process, and you go on to stacking your cake easy. I have spoken in previous videos about I've spoken in previous videos about intention concerning whether you want thicker layers or thinner layers, and a few reasons influence that. You want to watch I think a chocolate drip cake I made recently. The title, I think the thumbnail is a very special cake tutorial. I'll link that in the description box where I talk you through the intention. That cake was for my son. I settled for thicker layers compared to my very sort of medium-sized layers that I would normally go for. And I spoke in detail about the intention for those thicker layers. So that might also be a useful video connected to this that will serve you well. So you want to check that out. But at the end of the session, I will update the chat and let you and leave that information there. If you're giving me a compliment over there, look man, very clear footed. Thank you. I hope you can hear me though. Some days I think, can you hear me? Is the mic? Well, I don't have a microphone. I'm telecasting from my phone, but I'm hoping I can upgrade the sound also to give you some more value over here. So thank you. And if you're in the chat, do consider subscribing. Hit the notification bell to be notified of future videos such as this and more. And don't forget to like this video. If you're on the replay crew and you're back to watching this video after this live is done, hello there and welcome back. I hope if it's your first time, welcome to the channel. And if you've been here, welcome back. And I hope this video proves useful to you. We're continuing with having to fill and stack your cake. With that said, I have had to look at my cake layers a little closely to look at which ones will serve me better. Just because you've leveled the cake doesn't mean you just go and level and fill them. You want to look closely and consider which layers are heavier. If you have more heavier layers, you want to make sure the heavier layers are on the bottom of the cake. And if you have lighter layers or thinner layers, you want to make sure they are on the top of the cake. Because the thing about layering cakes is also that gravity will work against you. The heavier the cakes are, if you stack heavier layers on top of thinner layers, they will crash down, the weight will crash down, and it will lead to your cake crumbling. With all that said, we have our first layer of cake that has bits in here broken off. So how do you fix that? There are a few ways you can fix that. One simple way you can fix that is to use ganache. Because I'm using ganache and ganache has set solid, I can fill this part in with ganache. But if I was stacking this cake as a heavy tiered cake, this will not be a risk to take. Because the intention is if I took that risk and I was stacking, say, a 3-tier cake, it means the bottom side of this cake has no weight on it because of the space here. Obviously, I will dowel the cake, but this space doesn't make for good structure if not handled well. So one good thing I will probably do here to fix that space is this. I am just going to put some buttercream in there to serve as glue. Just putting some buttercream lightly in there. And what I'm going to do is that I have some cake crumbs. So I am just going to fill that side in. So essentially, I'm building the cake back up by doing that. So you see, we're building the cake back up. And if I wasn't on this class, if I filled this part in, I will have to leave the cake to set completely in the fridge before I came to do anything. But of course, because this is a class, I can get away with not doing that. And all I've done is just take away the excess. And when I come to it, I will cover this part with ganache. The ganache I am using is milk chocolate ganache, a ratio of 4:1. So it will set solid and it will hold the cake form for me. So that is one way to fix that problem here. And as you can see, I have just gone ahead and filled part of that space rather quickly. With that done, we're going to move on to, let me just wipe my work surface, it's a bit messy. That aside, we have the layer of cake. What I'm going to do is get my piping bag. In the piping bag is a round tip piping nozzle, and over the jar over there, the reason why I have a jar, just in case you don't know, is that it creates a hollow space into which I can fill the buttercream easily. If you're a beginner, this can be a little bit tricky because if you don't know how to press on a piping jar, it can be a little bit intimidating. But whilst in the past, actually, well, I wanted to use the freehand, but there are so many videos on the channel where I use the freehand. Whilst in the past, I could freehand this, and I've done that a lot of the time. One of the advantages of using a piping bag is that it allows you even distribution. Obviously, if you freehand it, you can use different techniques. But as somebody who's done this over a couple of years, it can be easy to also eyeball and paste through the process easily. But because I want you to get some value out of it, what I've done is you want to make sure when you fill your piping bag, you can press on it without tension, right? Because if you overfill this, it's going to be too hard to handle. And if you feel it less, you are going to struggle to kind of have grip over your piping bag. So I figured that this is just enough for me. And what we are doing is we are piping a border. The good thing is that another advantage of a piping bag is that depending on how much pressure you apply, there is evenness of your spread, right? So you are not going to get more buttercream than the other. And for what we want to achieve, you have already, with this border, you have created an inner circle into which you can either create some more filling in. But over here, I am just moving the buttercream. You're just moving the buttercream in the piping bag around, and that, just like that, we are done here. Now, if you're a complete beginner and you've done this, you can leave that as is, but because we have lumps of circles here, what you want to do is just move your turntable around to smoothen this over, and just like that, you have even buttercream on top of your cake. Can you see? We have even buttercream that is evenly spread, no issues. And we are looking for our next layer of cake, which in this cake is this guy over here. Now, with the buttercream that is on the sides of the cake, you might just want to clear that out so that it's not edging out. In a summer weather where it is very hot, this can be sliding, so you want to keep an eye on that. But over here, remember, we ended up just filling the side there, so we have cake crumbs that needs taken care of, but we will come to that. So we'll move on to filling the cake with the piping bag, turning the cake around. All I'm doing is just turning the cake around, nothing more than that. And there, and there, there. With that, I'm gonna get myself the knife, the palette knife again, and then you spread this all around, and that's it. And then we have the next cake, which is the third layer of cake, to go over it. Can you see how the stacking is a lot easier if you're very intentional and you employ the simple processes? With using the piping bag, you have an even spread and an even filling in each layer, which means you're not going to have more buttercream than you need in one cake than the other. I've always known that using the piping bag method is very efficient, but sometimes you just don't want the trouble of the extra task, which can be a little bit tedious. So the buttercream is done from the bag, so we're going to fill the bag back in again, and just like that, being able to level and tour your cake nicely aids a better stacking experience for you, because besides just filling and stacking this, there's not much I have done with this process, and that is something to note. So with that done, I am just going to stick this over, just like that, and we've got the buttercream all done. I'm going to get the same knife again. I said offset spatula. Why am I calling it a knife? And just like that, we've got it sorted. And I am going to stick the next cake on it. And just like that, we have our cakes all sorted. Now, I wouldn't do anything to it only because my buttercream is soft, and as the layers have come down, you can see it's getting shiny, and it's going to get a little bit, it's going to start sliding. So this, when you observe that, it's probably good time to leave the cake alone. Don't do anything. The temptation can be to try and move the cake around and do stuff. Just leave the cake to set completely, will you? Okay. With that, I'm going to do one little thing. That is, if it will allow me. I'm going to try and see if I can put, this won't help. Gladys, listen to your own advice and don't do this. Right. I have listened to my own advice. I'm going to leave the part of the cake that is filled in. I'm going to leave that. And with the cake filled like this, we're going to leave it in a fridge to set completely. One thing you can do at this stage, if you, decorating can be done in phases. Like you can start and then continue at another time that is convenient for you. So for instance, if you're a beginner and you're undertaking a single tiered cake, but you're new to the process, you want to start, let's say, maybe a couple of days in advance. Your cake is due in 3 days and you're starting on day one. At the end of this phase here, you want to wrap your cake in cling film. You want to put it in the fridge. Seal the entire cake before putting it in the fridge. You can even freeze it, but the freezing can be a little bit tricky to get right, especially if you're a beginner, because if you don't handle that well, it will cause cracks in your cake. I'll probably be back in a future video to talk all about those processes, but right now you have a cake to decorate in 3 days. You've started on day one. At this stage of the cake decorating process, just wrap this cake in cling film, leave it in the fridge to set completely for a day or two. A refrigerator has a tendency to dry cakes out, so you want to make sure that your cake has simple syrup on it. But if your recipe is optimized for moist outcomes for your cakes, then you don't need simple syrup. If you watch the earlier cake, oh, actually, putting this cake together, I didn't add simple syrup because this chocolate cake is super moist and it's only due out tomorrow. Plus, I baked it fresh yesterday evening and it's been on the countertop for less than 12 hours. So it's still a freshly layered cake that is super moist and that works for me. With that said, that is a 7-inch cake and the small one is a 5-inch cake. This cake is going to be decorated as a knuckles themed, apparently. What do you call it? Knuckles, Sonic themed sort of cake. It's a little boy's birthday, and it's such a privilege to make this cake for the family. So I'm going to put this cake in the fridge. I'm going to come back and then we'll put the 5-inch together. But in the meantime, if you have questions in the chat and you want to ask me, just leave them in the chat and I'll be quick to answer you. But I need to move this cake quickly before it starts sliding on me. I'll be back with you shortly. So we're back again. Same process. I think I'm going to slow a bit more and not be so information centered, and that is because we are still employing the same process as the earlier one to fill this cake. So we have a 5-inch, the cake card goes over. And I have layer number 1. Okay. Thank you. Oh, okay. How long have you been decorating? Is it Maggie Maxi, lovely? Did I get your name right? Maggie Maxi. Right, so we have the chocolate buttercream filling in there. Then all I'm doing is taking that off. And this is just 2 layers of cake. Okay. Right. And just like that, we are done with the 2 layers of cake. Okay, Maggie Maxi. I got your name right. Normally, I am very cautious about pronouncing names. I do tend to use Google Assist a lot because whilst I may be speaking English, English is not my first language. I'm actually Ghanaian. So some days it can be hard to kind of, because then I think about the pronunciation in my Ghanaian ways, and I sound a little bit daft now for saying that, but that is just to say that it's important to me that I get names and stuff right, and sometimes it's not always the case. So I appreciate you being kind about it. That said, we have the 2 layers of cake that I have put together. As you can see, because these are very light and very delicate, the top is not pushing over the down, so we don't have too much cake buttercream oozing out here. And with the 2 layered cake, I'm going to put that in the fridge to set equally. And then probably the next step after all of that is to kind of trim the cake and then cover it in ganache and get the cake all set up ready for decoration. That is my intention. But otherwise, I hope, did you find the process useful? Unless perhaps you just join in the chat. Sorry about that. I was just trying to get in the chat to see what, if you have questions for me and how. Okay, Maggie Maxi, right? Okay. So if you just